Thank you, Chairman Cruz, and it's great to be here. Thank you for the witnesses for being here today. I think you're hearing concerns, at least from this side of the dais, that, and really it should be on both sides, because we know that this country was built on a very, very clear separation of powers and the importance of an independent, impartial judiciary. And I have repeatedly warned how dangerous it can be, coming from a family of judges, having been a judge myself, worked also in the executive branch, how dangerous it can be if someone trades in their black robe for a blue jersey. And I heard you use the term negligent. You know, I think it is negligent when you have judges predicting what an executive may do before they even do it, and bringing that bias with them into their decision-making. In fact, at a session of the Judicial Conference of the United States back in March of 2025, Judge Boasberg said to Chief Justice Roberts and roughly 24 other federal judges, statements expressing his belief that the Trump administration would disregard rulings of federal courts and trigger a, quote, constitutional crisis. I think it is negligent, unacceptable, an abuse of power for a federal judge to go out and start talking about what an executive will do before they do it. You know, it kind of reminds me about a federal judge that said maybe a senator or even 8 senators would destroy evidence. And that is the exact kind of judge that should not be left on the bench wearing a black robe, thinking that disguises him as being impartial, when in fact he's conducting partisan warfare with the protection and shield of a bench. And this is dangerous. If we've hit 250 years of this great country. I would like many, 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 many more. So would all of the great Americans that value freedom and what this country has offered to so many. And this is not just hyperbole. This is not just a show. Let's look at Venezuela. Once a rich and thriving nation, Venezuela was taken over by narco-dictators running a country as a cartel and subjecting its people to an oppressive, dehumanizing, and the deadly forces of socialism. And how did that happen? Well, when I was Attorney General, I met with exile Supreme Court justices from that country who had to flee. They said that all of it started happening, the freedom, their security, the legitimacy of government, when they packed the court. When Chavez packed the court with blatant partial judicial activists, the regime then had puppets of installed judges that made rulings based on what they thought the law should be, how they wanted it to be, not the people's law. And when the situation in Venezuela continued to deteriorate and the regime eroded any sense of faithful constitutional government and governance, there was absolutely no one left to stop them. The conduct of our federal judges and any departure by a judge from the rule of law in the advancement of a purely political end or a personal bias must be dealt with, and it is our job here in Congress to make sure that is the case. In fact, it has been said historically, impeachment cannot just be a scarecrow. I would like for you to comment on whether or not you believe right now this is happening, that judges are using the bench to shield themselves from predicting, encouraging, expressing a political bias, and having that work into their decisions, embracing what they believe the law should be, what they want it to be, rather than what the people's law actually is.
Well, thank you, Senator. Unfortunately, I do think it's happening more than it should. You mentioned earlier on about the Judicial Conference meeting with Judge Boasberg and Chief Justice Roberts, where he told Justice Roberts that judges on his court were concerned that the president would violate court orders, even though at that point the president had not, and of course the president has not since. I think that was a very problematic engagement because it shows that judges on the D.C. District Court are prejudging the president. They're prejudging the president's Department of Justice on their ability to comply with the law. And so how can the president or his Department of Justice get a fair shake in front of those judges in the D.C. District Courts, knowing that there are members of that bench who have prejudged that litigant? I think Judge Boasberg owes an accounting on which judges told him that so that we can be sure they are not deciding cases involving the president or his Department of Justice.
I see my time has expired. Thank you. Thank you.